Hello, and welcome to another ringside edition of All or Nada, according to Jack. This is a new background behind me, my ring. Uh, with me tonight, I have King Chris Allo. Welcome, Chris. And I
What's going
have
on, Jack?
Stephen Keeler from the Rock Fantasy Files. Oh,
Nice.
with his Dusty Rhodes. Very cool. Oh, very nice.
I
So
tell you about that Dusty Rhodes.
it's so funny. So back in November, I went to a WWE Raw show, and there was somebody dressed as Dusty Rhodes,
Oh
just
yeah,
like
I
that.
I seen that. I'm probably the same guy. I went
Yeah.
to two AEW shows, and he was also dressed as Polka Dot Dusty Rhodes.
Too funny, and he wasn't even watching the show. He just kept walking
Oh, yeah.
back and forth, trying to get attention to
That's
himself.
it. It's kind of like those same people, which I never understand, who go to the Comic Cons or the horror movie conventions, but they have no interest in like buying shit and getting autographs like normal people. They just want to walk around in their costume and get noticed.
Yeah,
I don't understand it.
the funniest thing. But actually, I did meet a wrestler at a Comic-Con, but I'll save that until our next show. But
Nice.
in any event, so what we're going to talk about tonight is we're each going to tell some stories about pro wrestlers that we met, and it could be from any federation. It could be WWE, it could be AEW, Impact, or any which one, Ring of Honor, any ECW. It could be any federation, but I just, I love to hear people's stories, and I have a few good ones to share of my own. So whoever raises their hand first can go first. And it is, I guess it will be Mr. Keeler. So go ahead, Steve.
So yeah, back in the day, I worked with in the wrestling business a little bit, and of course I was a fan. So I guess we get a little of that history where I started watching it in the 60s and 70s on TV, and when it was whatever federation that was then. But of course, got back into it in the 80s, got out of it for a while, really got out of it. And I came back, I was watching some show in the middle of the night, and Cactus Jack was on it, and a guy named the Sandman was there with Woman, and got back into it heavy, found out it was ECW, and got back into wrestling in the late 90s to the point where I was selling wrestling merchandise at like high schools with Northeast Wrestling, which is still going on with Michael Bryan that runs that in Connecticut and all around in high schools. We'd set up at high schools, and we'd have Jake Snake Roberts and this guy, and for a couple of headliners, and then Jerry the King Lawler would always be there. But we worked wrestling cards, and then of course Chris Allen, my good friend here, had the club seats for ECW Arena, and we used to go. What was it, every 3 weeks, right, Chris? To
Every
the
3
ECW
weeks for years. Yep.
We'd drive to Philly every 3 weeks. Sometimes he had 4 seats, so it'd rotate if somebody couldn't make it, and we had a lot of good times. And I started doing signings in the store, and I guess my story will be probably not the most famous wrestler I'll start off with, and it kind of blends into another pick, but I used to be friends, and still, I guess I still would be if I see her, Missy Hyatt, the Walking Riot, and it came out of the Southern wrestling, and I was obsessed with her a little bit. I remember cutting short a vacation. I was at the Jersey Shore, and I wanted to meet Missy Hyatt, and I never had met her before, and got a signing. She was here in the Galleria Mall doing a signing in the middle of the mall once. That was my first time really meeting her. And then later on became friends with her, and I used to take her around and do signings. And she had come to my store. She had come to Tim Embler. I'm friends with Tim Embler that has a control center and runs the Wrestling Icons in Philadelphia too. And we used to run wrestling conventions in Newburgh at the hotel there, and she was one of our guests there. I used to bring Missy to the Kiss. We brought her to Chiller Theater, the Kiss convention. And I also would, so I became friends with her. And I used to go by Satin Dolls a lot. I'd be driving through Jersey, and I'd stop in there. One day I'm looking over, there's Missy. And I'm like, hey, we were talking, and I haven't seen her in a while, and she was working at Satin Dolls for a while, and I don't know what she's doing. I know she still shows up and does some signings here and there, but she was like one of the first ladies that really, was a great manager. She was with the Nasty Boys, I believe, right, Chris?
Yes. Yeah.
And I mean, she was married to Eddie Gilbert, wasn't she?
Yep, she was. She did a book that I bought, but I don't know if I ever actually read it.
Yeah.
That was a couple years ago.
I mean, she got kind of famous for like having her Missy Hyatt.net website for
Right.
years.
She did that website too, Wrestling Vixens, with
Yes.
three X's in the middle, where she got naked, Sunny got naked, a couple other famous ladies got naked or somewhat naked.
Yeah, yeah.
But then that collapsed, and there was some friction between Sunny and Missy Hyatt.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But along with her, I will combine this into my extra guest that we were talking about for my first two. She was good friends with Leia Meow from WCW, who was more famous as Kimona Wanalea from ECW. And Kimona would come out with Raven. They found Kimona working at a adult club also, and her boyfriend ran, and Raven was I think a DJ there, right, Chris?
Yes.
Raven and Richards were.
And I went with you once to see her dance in.
Yeah, we did.
In Jersey. We went to ECW Arena. We saw a whole card. We got cheesesteaks, and then we went to the strip club and hung out with Kimona. But she wasn't. It was a really slow night from what I remember. She wasn't really dancing. She was just drinking soda and hanging out with us.
I don't know if she was always a dancer there or whether she was a bartender. Maybe a little bit of
she
both.
was a bar. Maybe that's what it was. But I remember she did
yeah,
dance,
I became good friends with her.
And it was not nude. I remember that. It was just a go-go.
Yeah. And I became good friends with her boyfriend at the time. And he had a bar in New Jersey. And I actually used to drive her around too. Like one time I met up when she was in WCW. I met up with her in Wilkes-Barre, and I call her up. It's like, hey, she's like, I need a ride from Wilkes-Barre to Binghamton. You want to come? And I was like, yeah. And I was like starstruck, and would go into WCW, and I got to stay at the hotel where they were staying in Binghamton. And you want to talk about meeting wrestlers? I met the whole WCW roster that night. The WCW used to bring in their whole roster.
Right. Even if they
AEW reminds me of them a little bit in their battle plan now, because they have so much talent. WCW was a lot like that. They had way more TV time to use them though, but they would bring in like over 100 and some wrestlers and fly them all in.
Wow.
They'd go to a meeting.
What to do with them. Yeah.
And then they'd find out if they were working that night or working the taping the next night. I think it was Thunder or whatever. And a lot of them would find out they're not working at all. So they just hang out in the hotel, at the pool. I remember going to the pool, waiting for Kimona to come down to visit me. And like Lex Luger and Miss Elizabeth were at the pool. And then I went into the bar, and like Mean Gene was there. So I've already mentioned 100 wrestlers already, but Hogan was there, and Scott Hall, and they all had their cliques. The luchadors were there, WCW, and they were all hanging out in this restaurant. And I'll tell you one quick story, then I'll pass it off to Chris, that Scott Hall was there one night, and there was a few regular people that got in. Maybe you had to stay had a hotel key to be in there that night. They wouldn't let you in the hotel at all. It was a Holiday Inn. And Scott Hall, somebody approached him for an autograph, and the guy looked at him, and Scott Hall looked back at him and goes, "Hey, I don't bother you when you're moving furniture." I remember him getting really upset with the guy for bothering me. He goes, I don't ask you when your job, and whatever. And Scott Hall did not do an autograph with the guy, but Mean Gene was one of the best that night. He thought he knew me from somewhere else, and he was going on this long conversation. I finally tell him, I think you're mistaken, but he bought me a drink, and I was hanging out with Kimona and Medusa. And
did he talk with his hands? He used to talk with his hands all the time.
Maybe. I don't remember that much in detail how he talked, but I mean, he was very friendly. And
that's cool.
So that was my first story. And like now we'll throw hey, I'm going to tag you in, Chris. Tag. Put up your hand.
That's good. I gotta hold on to the string while I reach for you.
Watch out, somebody's hitting it back with a head with a chair.
But yeah, Steve and I went to a lot of wrestling shows. My story is the same thing as Steve's, just a little, somewhat not as far-reaching. You know, I got into wrestling in the late '70s. Went to my first wrestling card in 1980 and was super into it for years. Got out of it in the early '90s, and then ECW is what pulled me back in the mid '90s, similar to Steve. And yeah, I became a bigger wrestling fan in the '90s than ever before. And I had front row tickets for the world famous ECW arena in Philadelphia, now known as the 2300 Arena in Philadelphia on Swanson and Rittner Streets. And they were season tickets. You bought four shows at a time, and then you just kept renewing them. And I renewed them for years. And like Steve said, you know, I would go with certain people if I had extras for Steve or some of Steve's buddies, you know, Duke and Steve Levin or whoever. You know, sometimes I couldn't go, so I would just sell the tickets outright to Steve or other people. But it was a blast. It was a lot of fun, and it was for years. It was every 3 weeks, and then as ECW started to expand, then they would push it out more, and it would be every 5 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever it was. And I started going in summer of 1995, and I mean I kept the tickets until ECW folded in 2001. But after going for a couple shows, I found out that all the wrestlers and all the fans, because I was about 3 hours away, stayed at the same hotel. I can't remember what the first hotel was, but eventually it wound up being the world famous Travelodge in Philadelphia, which was this long cylinder-like hotel. And, you know, the wrestling would start at 7:30 and it would be over by like 11:30. So then by like 12 o'clock, you know, all the wrestlers, not all of them, but a good amount of the wrestlers and a large amount of fans would go to the Travelodge. And it was the Travelodge, the bar was packed, and it was just the sort of thing where they were totally cool with you just walking around with your own beers and drinking them. But we quickly learned, and I don't know if it's still the same, but last call in Philadelphia was 2 a.m. and they cut the drinking. So what I would do with my friends is we would bring extra coolers of beer because, you know, the matches would end at 11:30, but sometimes these guys would have to stay behind at ECW Arena and shoot promos for upcoming events. So these guys would get all beat up, and then they would come back to the hotel and they'd want to get fucked up, but they wouldn't have that much time. So how it started was I used to work with a guy that worked at a pizzeria with Little Guido. What his original name was Damian Stone. And so I wound up talking to him, and he, you know, like Steve, we mentioned before we went online, you know, he came up to my hotel room, and, you know, it was me and a couple buddies. We had all this extra beer. We just drank a bunch of beers with them, and we sort of did like the shoot interview thing, you know, but this is in the 90s, but we weren't taping anything and we weren't looking to sell anything or whatever. I mean, you know, there was no cell phones back then. I mean, not for another couple of years anyway. And of course, they didn't have cameras. So we got to know quite a few wrestlers very well. And then Damian Stone, which Little Guido would be our go-to guy. So we would go to him and be like, hey man, you know, I'd love to hang out tonight with Tommy Rich. You know Tommy? Or Rob Van Dam or Sandman and Raven and all these guys. So, you know, one by one, we would hang out with all of them and drink beer with us. And so it was a lot of fun. You know, so the first story that I remember that I jotted down was a guy that we hung out with all the time, like every 3 weeks when we were in Philly, was Rob Van Dam. And it's a little blurry because we're going back, what, 28 years or so on some of these things, because this was from May 11th, 1996. So right, is that 28 years? I didn't do the math right, probably, but it's a long time ago. Yeah. And again, we're talking heavy amounts of alcohol. But I remember doing the weekend in Philly that year, and I can't remember it might have been in Reading, Pennsylvania, but Rob Van Dam was still relatively new to ECW at the time, even though he had done a lot of work on the indies. So May 10th, 1986, went to this little show that ECW did, and in one of the main events, in the middle of the ring, Rob Van Dam pinned Shane Douglas clean. And, me and my buddies we were fans. We were like, holy shit. So the very next night was the big sold out ECW arena show, which had to look up, right? May 11th, 1996, which was later named A Matter of Respect. A lot of people now, when they talk about old ECW shows, they refer to these shows as pay-per-views. These were not pay-per-views. These were house shows. These were not shown on pay-per-view. And also, all of these mythical names didn't exist. But they didn't call it A Matter of Respect in 1996. It got named that after the videotape came out, which had the whole 3-hour show. But long story short, Rob Van Dam again was in the main event, and he pinned Sabu clean in the middle of the ring, and it was like, holy shit!
Did he use that 5-star frog splash?
I think he did. It's a little fuzzy now, Jack. Yeah. But what I specifically remember was hanging out with Rob that night, and I think it might have been just Rob, but we were drinking beers, and I remember saying to Rob, dude, holy shit, man. Like, you were on the way. I'm like, you beat Shane Douglas on Friday, and you beat Sabu on Saturday. And I will never forget. He was just looking at me so strange, like, yeah? Like, what does that mean? I'm like, what does that mean? I'm like, dude, this would be like, I will never forget the conversation. I'd be like, this would be like if you went into WCW and you beat Hulk Hogan on Friday and Ric Flair on Saturday. Like, you're the fucking man now. And he just, and maybe it was the alcohol or the weed, because Rob Van Dam was a huge weed smoker back then, as he is now. But yeah, he just didn't quite grasp the enormity of what these two matches would do to him to help set him up as a superstar, which of course he eventually became.
Okay, very nice. Okay, so my stories will probably be quicker because I don't have these connections to wrestlers. These were more happenstance that I had a situation once where I used to work at an electronics store, and these two professional wrestlers walked in. But I'll tell that story at our next show. But for this one, I was hanging out with so you guys know Pete Pardo very well. But do you know Grant by any chance, Kicker?
Yeah, he was on Hudson Valley Squares.
So it was Pete, Grant, myself, a bunch of other people. We went to see Dream Theater in 1999 at Roseland in New York City. I think it was the Metropolis Part 2 tour. But in any event, so we just gave our tickets in, walked through the door. We're sitting in, we're standing in like the vestibule as we're walking into the arena. And behind us, who walks in off the street? Chris Jericho.
Wow.
Yeah, he was very cool. He talked to everybody. Pete was a wrestling fan at the time, so we both approached him. We talked. He signed our ticket stubs.
Nice.
Very nice guy. Now, if you look at him on TV, he doesn't seem very big, and I'm about 5'10" and a half, and he was about my height, but he was freaking built. I mean, really built for, here you're thinking 230 and he's next to all these other behemoths. He's a small guy, but he really wasn't. So, but he's very cool, very engaging to everybody. I think he may have still been a heel at that time, but he was still very cool. And I remember not wanting to be very starstruck. So, I just talked to him for a few minutes and, let him go
Oh,
about his.
99, was he already in WCW?
No, he was WWE. He was actually, so
In
they were,
He
99?
was Y2J, right?
yes,
Yeah.
Y2J.
Right,
Now,
because he went from ECW to WCW and then WCW to WWF.
yes.
Yeah.
So I do remember that there was a pay-per-view in Hartford the next night. So he was in New York, so he was able to go to the Dream Theater show. So
Mm.
Nice.
happenstance.
I remember his debut in ECW.
Oh
He was
yeah.
like a pretty boy. He was Lionheart then.
Yep.
And I remember like Duke and the guys booing him, like, "Oh, come on, pretty boy."
But he was a great worker. I mean, he
Oh
was,
yeah,
he was
still,
awesome.
he still is.
Yeah,
And he's great on the mic. I mean,
absolutely.
He
The
was
best.
just up here in Stroudsburg the other night. Actually, he played at the Chance. I
He played
didn't
the
go,
Chance on
but
Easter. Yeah.
did you go to that?
I was gonna, but the olds crept in, and I said,
Yeah.
listen, I've seen Fozzy like 4
I've
times
never seen
already."
Fozzy, but
Yeah.
I've seen and Jericho was in Stroudsburg, and Chris Caffrey drove over to hang out with him like 2 nights before. And he was raving about the reaction figures at the little record shop in Stroudsburg. And I had just wished that, he had would sometime
God.
get to my store if I was near a venue, where normal things like that would happen,
Right. Yeah, that's true.
because he, as we were interviewed Nasty Ronnie on my channel on Rock Fantasy Files last winter. And Nasty Ronnie was talking a lot about Jericho, I guess. And I guess they hang out sometimes still.
Interesting.
Cool.
Because Nasty Ronnie, that would be a good guy for Jack. If we talked about getting Nasty Ronnie on just to talk about wrestling, because Nasty Ronnie did all that Florida wrestling with Kevin Sullivan and those guys.
He was
back
really
then.
he was
I-
really the
I used to
innovator of the
watch
whole rock
Florida
and wrestling.
Championship Wrestling. Yeah. So I do remember it. Yeah. I remember.
So is it my turn again?
Yes, it is. Go
So
ahead.
this one, I guess, would be one of the more popular, famous wrestlers that I actually got to meet and was a fan of. And he remembered me by New York Bang Bang, he would say when he saw me. And of course, if I'd be giving away who that is. I know him as Cactus Jack Manson, which that's where I first saw Cactus Jack, Mick Foley, at the Middletown Fairgrounds when they used to wrestle on the speedway. They'd set up a ring on the actual front stretch. They didn't have the stage then. They would just set it up there. WWE used to too, but this was I still have the poster up at the shop. I can't remember what it was on TV around here too at the time. It was on like a weird channel. And it was Cactus Jack Manson was there in a battle royal, and Cowboy Bob Orton was there that day too. And I forget the Wrestling Federation, but we got to meet him that time. We were drinking, and what the old school wrestling used to do, you'd get drunk and you'd heckle the wrestlers, and you'd get the interaction from them. I remember us yelling at Bob Orton, "Hey Bob, where's your horse? Your cowboy, where's your horse at?" And, all the stupid stuff. But then Mick did a signing at a place called TJ's Baseball Cards. This was around 96, I think, when they did the ECW, did the Heat Wave on the fairgrounds, and the same situation where they wrestled on the track.
Oh, that was 95.
95, was it?
Because I was there. I remember seeing you there, Steve. That was like August 1995. That was Sandman Cactus is the main event.
And yep, so he did the signing there, and we got the photos and everything else. And then of course I saw him at ECW Arena, and he remembered me. "Hey, Middletown, bang bang." So got to see him. I got to meet him a couple of years ago. I went to the wrestling WrestleCon in New York City, which was a lot of fun. Right before the pandemic, I got to go, and I met him again and got a photo with him. He was taking the barbed wire bat and trying to cut my head open. So I guess that's my Mick Foley story.
Okay.
Nice. I saw his,
Jack, do you know that you've got a countdown going on here?
I do know that. Yeah. I guess you saw it. It's at 9 minutes.
9 minutes. Yeah.
But well, we could do one of two things. We could try and finish the 9 minutes, or we could end and then do a part two of our remaining one or two
Well, let
stories.
Chris do his
I was
next.
gonna
He
say
should have time.
I'll do mine kind of quick, and then we'll save the rest for next time.
Okay.
But yeah, mine was from a show that just celebrated an anniversary. ECW's first pay-per-view, which was Barely Legal, which was April 13th, 1997. And I had front row tickets again. And the show was really good. And but it was interesting because ECW did their show on Sunday, and WCW was in town because they were doing a Monday Nitro in the same area in Philly on Monday. So after the pay-per-view, everybody went back to the hotel to party, and it was the ECW crew and the WCW crew. So I remember hanging out with like guys like Kevin Sullivan, Public Enemy, Hugh Morris, and long story short, I remember being in the room and drinking and bullshitting with one of my buddies, and I did my my Johnny Grunge impersonation because I loved Public Enemy at the time, and I was like, "Oh, Rocco, I don't know what's going to happen tonight." I mean, I can't do it now because I don't remember exactly how it went, but it was something like that. But true story, and we would always leave the door unlocked because some of the wrestlers would just come in and have a couple beers with us. Long story short, true story, I did the impersonation, and Rocco Rock came in because he thought that I was Johnny Grunge in the hotel room. Duke was there with us, Steve, so I'm sure he could verify that. But yeah, so then we hung out with Rocco Rock, and we were shooting the shit, and then he went to get Johnny Grunge, and it was cool because they were ECW guys, but now they were in WCW. Oh, and real quick, I do remember hanging out with Rob Van Dam that night, and he was really pissed off because he did wrestle on Barely Legal, but he was a substitute for Chris Candido, and he was pissed off that Paul Heyman did not have him booked on the regular show, and the only reason he wrestled because he was a substitute, and he was pissed off about that.
Yeah, no, I could see that. All right, very cool.
That's my second story.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell my two very quickly, and I have a picture all set up for this. So there you go. First story, I met Mick Foley on a couple of occasions. First time was at Belmont Park, which is the current site of UBS Arena. He was signing autographs at a fair. That was the first time. The second time, I didn't actually talk to him, but Pete and I went to see Ian Anderson do the Thick as a Brick 1 and 2 tour at Beacon Theater. Out walks Mick Foley after the show.
Wow.
Yeah. So now the third time, so down at Lido Beach in Long Island, there was this biker rally for Toys for Tots, and if you look at the picture, it's over my right shoulder.
Yeah.
It's you can see both Dee Snider and Mick Foley. I met them both very cool guys. So
awesome.
That's that one. Now, if you look over which shoulder, my left shoulder, I met Taz, and this was a great story. So I belong to a lodge, and we did this benefit spaghetti dinner for somebody who had ALS. And this person who had ALS turned out to be Taz's nephew. So, and I actually did all the cooking and made all this. So Taz actually ate my spaghetti and meatballs. Nice. So it was the coolest thing. But he was a very nice guy, and we talked old time wrestling, WWE from the 1970s, and both Steve and Chris gave some background. My first wrestling show was back in like September or October of '76 when I saw Bruno Sammartino face Bruiser Brody in a steel cage match. But yeah,
unbelievable.
Yeah. So, and we were talking about stories like that, Andre the Giant and Stone Cold Steve Austin he wrestled with, and things of that nature. But it was very cool. So
that's awesome.
We have
was it his nephew who was it Chris Chetty who was a wrestler?
No, I don't know.
A different nephew.
It was a large brother of mine who ironically also was stricken with kidney cancer, but he was friends with this guy, and yeah, I could try and get his name, but
Yeah,
no,
no worries. Just wondering.
but yeah, very, very sad. But
Yeah,
we raised thousands of dollars for this young man, which
that's
was,
awesome.
that was my proudest moment of, of all, the whole night. But of course, a couple of my brothers were kidding me that they were gonna pay him money to body slam me on the on the tile floor. But thank
Nice.
God that never happened.
That's
As
good.
you can see, I'm a little more gaunt standing next to Taz. So
Well, he just
Yeah.
ate your spaghetti, so
yep.
I could tell you a Taz story real quick. We're running down 3 minutes.
Yeah.
I was set up at a toy sci-fi convention, some kind of meeting like thing in New Jersey once, and Taz was one of the guests, and we had ECW shirts because I was one of the few guys anywhere that had them because I was friends with Tommy Dreamer, and Tommy Dreamer was selling me some. We used to wait till Chris may remember. I used to wait till after the show, and Tommy would sell us shirts, and it was like so great getting those shirts because we would always want to buy all those shirts when we got down there anyhow. But I had them to sell in my shop and whatnot, and we sold them there. And Taz went and was harassing whoever was working at my booth, and wanted to call the police on us, and they were bootlegs. And then I had to go over, and he was really hot, and I had to calm him down. I was like, dude, I buy him from Tommy. Give Tommy a call. Tell him you know Steve Keeler. So that was my Taz meeting.
interesting.
Yeah. Well, sorry that happened, because my encounter with Taz was, great. So, really,
Well, yeah.
really cool.
Well,
guy.
you weren't selling T-shirts that looked like that he thought were bootlegs in
Right.
like
That's funny.
1998 or something.
That's funny.
That's something else. I did almost get accosted by Hornswoggle one time, if you guys know him.
I
Yeah,
know.
Yeah.
but that'll be a story for the next show.
Next chapter.
Yes, the next chapter. But
Cool.
I just want to say thank you both for joining. This was a lot
sure.
of fun. I love talking old school wrestling, and we got to do it again sometime.
For sure.
I have an idea, another idea. Maybe we could do a show on our favorite heels of all time.
Sure.
All right.
And we got plenty more we could talk about meeting too in the next one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I will definitely hit you guys up. So thank you very much. And to everybody watching, please subscribe. Please add your comments to the comment section. Please tell Chris and Steve how great they are. And
No.
That's funny.
And instead of counting to 3, count to 5.
oh yes, King Kong Bundy.
Young Bundy,
Yeah,
yep.
he was in my store, so we could talk about him next time.
5.
Great in store one day.
Good stuff.
But in any event, all right, guys. Have a
Peace
good
out.
day.
All right, fellas. Be good.
Take care.
Cheers.